Hi, it's Paulissa with another Rebel of Intentional moment. Today, I wanted to have some real talk about depression and suicide. So, with the recent deaths by suicide of Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, depression and suicide are on the national conversation, and that's important. But it is not lost on me that every second of every day, other lives are lost, equally as magnificent and important to those who love them. So today, I wanted to take a little bit of time to share a perspective from someone who has been there, someone who had suicidal thoughts, not a mental health professional, not a psychiatrist, but someone who's actually been there. And what that's like with the 24-hour news cycle, what it requires to stay well when all of that information is coming at you. But before I do, I want to share the suicide prevention talk line number so that I provide resources, and I will provide it again at the end of this video. The National Suicide Prevention talk line number is 1-800-273-8255, or you can text the word connect to 741-741. Those hotlines are staffed 24/7. You do not have to do this alone, and you are not alone. So when there is discussion about celebrity suicide and it brings depression into the forefront of our consciousness, and we know people who are struggling, or we are struggling ourselves, there are a couple questions that we can ask that may help someone to get the assistance that they need to see some hope. And the first question, and it's very direct, these are very direct questions. The first question is, are you thinking of killing yourself? And it's an important and an intentionally direct question because when someone's suffering, it can be hard to find the words. Or the words may not sound like someone is considering killing themselves. And there is a very prevalent misconception that asking the question will implant the idea. And research is actually shows the opposite. It's also not a guarantee that asking the question will prevent an attempt. It's merely a beginning to have the conversation and to be able to hopefully persuade someone to get help, to at least have the conversation. The second question, which is equally as direct, is under what circumstances would you consider ending your life? And the reason that this question is important is because it gives us insight to what makes someone particularly vulnerable mentally and emotionally. So, common stressors for depression and suicide are major life changes, a shift that someone is having a hard time adjusting to. And those can be things like a job loss, divorce, um, the loss of a loved one or a pet, chronic pain, a new diagnosis, things like um, having had a previous attempt, having had suicidal ideation before. This can all make us vulnerable to depressive episodes. So, from the perspective of someone who has been there, when I was in crisis, it came on the heels of having 3 respiratory infections all at the same time, including double pneumonia. I spent 7 days in the hospital and I was released and woke up with the worst chest pain I've ever had in my entire life. And the discharge protocol said if you had chest pain to return to the hospital. So I did, and the doctors ran an EKG and other tests and said, no, you're not having a heart attack. Your chest walls are inflamed, and you should have known that it wasn't a heart attack, and you are wasting our time in the ER, which is already busy. Yes, they actually said that to me, um, to do this, and they were going to discharge me. And I said, I don't feel safe. So I advocated for 24 hours of observation and waited 8 hours to get that room. And when I got to that room, it was clear that the room was not intended to be a hospital room for a patient. There was old air ducts on the floor. The room held all of the housekeeping chemicals behind lock and key, as well as all of the medications for the entire floor behind lock and key. There was also a pass-through window for medical personnel to get in and out and take the medicine out. Um, I expressed that I have post-traumatic stress disorder and that for me, not being able to see people coming in and out, but being able to hear them was going to be a problem. I asked for the bed to be reoriented. It was not. Um, I was not given any of my daily medications, despite the fact that I entered the hospital with a med list that was current. I was also not checked up on in 24 hours. I was not seen by medical personnel until it was time to discharge me. Now, so I'm already sick. I can't breathe well. I have been isolated. The only persons that I saw were food service, so that meant that if I wanted human interaction, at 2 o'clock in the morning, if I wanted something from room service, I ordered something from room service because that was the only interaction that I was going to get. So I came home and I was suicidal. I'm a certified peer support specialist, so I know that if I don't feel safe around my medications or I might abuse them, that's the very definition of being suicidal. Yeah, that if my thought process was, you know, I'd be okay with taking my meds and going to sleep, and I don't care whether I wake up, that's a problem. So my husband and I locked up my medications, and he kept the key and administered them, and I spent 12 weeks in crisis, spending every spare moment that myself, my husband, my primary care doctor, and my therapist had to get me access to psychiatric services. And because I had a therapist, that meant that I was lower priority. I was considered less of a risk. Yeah, it was really challenging. I'm grateful for the support that I had because it got me through, but it was an incredible fight. And what I learned during that time was that I really did love myself. And I didn't think that I had that because I have a long history of abuse, a long lived experience of abuse. And so I didn't think that self love existed for me. But I realized several weeks into the process that if I didn't love myself, I wouldn't fight that hard for myself. Now, what happens when someone has had suicidal thoughts, or they've previously made an attempt, or there's the survivor of someone who died by suicide in a 24-hour news cycle when there's a celebrity death by suicide? For me, that thought process takes a lot of steps, and they are equally important so that I can ensure that I'm safe and I don't re-enter crisis, that things don't start breaking down. So what it looks like for me is the first question that I ask is, where am I at? What's on my heart? How is this affecting my mental and emotional state? Am I safe? Then the next question is my wellness recovery action plan up to date? Does it include any current triggers that I might have? Any current signs that things are breaking down? Any signs that I'm in crisis? Is my crisis plan up to date? Do I need to add something? Do I need to delete something? Do I need to add a different supporter? Do I need to change supporters? And do all of my supporters have a copy of the most recent RAP plan that I've made? The next thought process is, were I to have a crisis, would the coping skills that I currently have be enough to see me through? And the short answer is maybe they would be, maybe they wouldn't be, and all I can do is be honest about where I'm at and seek support. But knowing that I've been in that place before and gotten through it tells me that I would perhaps be able to face it again. I hope not to ever face it again, but the reality is that I'm at a higher risk than someone who hasn't had that thought process. And then the next thought process is, I need to step back. Not because I don't care that someone has been lost to suicide. That's not it. It is that in order to stay well, and because it's exceptionally vulnerable, I need to take a step back and I need to get off social media, because the tributes and seeing things in what was formerly trending and seeing things in the timeline means that if I don't, this thought process that I have to go through to ensure that I'm well and not heading into a crisis becomes a lather, rinse, and repeat cycle. So I have to get off social media. I have to limit TV watching. I have to limit listening to the radio. And I need to go into the things that help me check in with my body and where I'm at. So for me, that's art. It's music. It's meditation. It's doing quiet things, but also making sure that I'm not isolating. so that people know that for me, this feels vulnerable. So I tell my supporters, I need to take a step back because this is overwhelming. I'm safe. I'm safe at this moment, but I'm finding this really heavy. And so I take that time, and it's usually about 72 hours, to step back and check in with me and connect. Because it takes a lot of work to stay well. And it's the most important work that I will ever do so that I can stay. So I wanted to offer that perspective from someone who's been there in the hopes that it helps someone else. Um, so if you know someone who's suffering or you are suffering yourself, and because 1 in 4 persons will have a mental health challenge over the course of their lifetime, I guarantee you know someone who's suffering. So if you do, please refer them to the National Suicide Prevention Talk Line. That number again is 1-800-273-8255, or you can text the word connect to 741-741. Again, it's staffed 24/7. You are not alone. You are loved. You are enough. You matter. Please stay. Until next time, be a rebel of intentional presence. Talk about what matters. Farewell.